So let's talk a minute about how to make a custom container object. To set that up, one of the things that we did in earlier code is I wrote this read portfolio function. Essentially what it did is it read a file into a list of holding objects. Just to refresh your memory on that, you would say portfolio is read portfolio, some file name, and then what you got is a list of these holding objects. One of the things that you might do in this code is want to take that function and maybe promote the idea of a portfolio up into its own class definition. Like maybe somebody wants to have a class portfolio. Maybe the reason they want to have a class is they may want to put, custom operations on it. Like maybe there's going to be like a total cost method or something like that, or maybe, current value or something. Like the idea is they're taking like the idea of a portfolio and expanding it beyond what a list normally provides. So in order to do that, what somebody might do is they would say, I'm going to make a portfolio class. Maybe inside this class, I'm going to have an internal list. Like I'll have a list of holdings. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build the class to read data and manipulate it in that internal list. For example, instead of having this read portfolio function down here, maybe what I would do is I would take the functionality of that and move it up into perhaps like a class method or something. I have to type this correctly, but what I would do is maybe have a method from CSV, or you give me a file name. What that code is going to do is I'll have it read from a file and populate that internal list. I'll go ahead and make an instance of myself, and then I'll modify this code to append to that internal holdings list. Okay, so what I'm doing is taking existing code, kind of taking it and promoting it up into a class. And then maybe there's some methods here that do different things. I'll implement one of them. So maybe we have a method that computes the sum of shares times price, that kind of thing. What we're doing is we're building kind of a custom container for portfolio. And here's how that would actually work. Assuming that I haven't made any mistakes, you could basically make a portfolio by saying portfolio is equal to portfolio from CSV. You give it a file name. This would end up making a portfolio object. And then inside that object, you have this holdings list. And then it has a method total cost that you could do if you wanted to do that calculation. Here's the problem with doing that. By making a custom container, almost everything that you could do with a list has been broken. For example, none of the operations like len work. You can't find out how many things are in there. You can't index into a portfolio. You can't even do a for loop on it. Like if I wanted to say for H in portfolio, print H, that doesn't work as well. The reason that it doesn't work is that this class that I've created doesn't implement any of the special methods that Python needs to do these operations. Again, if you had a list, like A is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if I index that, that's the same as doing the getItem method. I don't have a getItem method on my portfolio. So my object, it just doesn't play nicely with Python. Now, to fix this, one of the things that you might consider is maybe adding more methods to this class. I mean, you could certainly come in here and define methods, maybe like a size method that returns, the length of the holdings or something. Or maybe you have like a, get holding method that you could define where you return like a index or something, returns like a specific thing. If you're going to do that though, you have to be a little bit careful with how you set that up. As a general rule, you don't want to write code that deviates from the way that people usually do Python programming. Like I don't want to have a size method on there, partly because size is not the way that people get the size of things in Python. Similarly, like get holding, that's a little weird. Python programmers aren't used to doing that. So what you should really start thinking about are maybe implementing some of these Python special methods. Turns out that the len function is implemented by a method len. Turns out that array indexing is implemented by a method getItem. It turns out that things like the for loop, for instance, use a method called iter. What I'm going to do is pass this along to give me the iter method on holding. Now, how I know to use these methods, keep in mind, I have to look these up in the reference manual. I know that every Python operation is mapped to some method name, and I'm picking out certain method names to make things work. So I've picked out a length, I've picked out a getItem, I've picked out iter. If I do this, one of the things that will happen is you'll find that this portfolio object all of a sudden behaves a whole lot nicer than it did before. I can read a portfolio. I can get things like the length of it. I can index into it. You can do indexing. I can write for loops on it, for H in portfolio, print, repr H, for instance. A whole bunch of stuff starts to open up. This is definitely something that you should consider if you're ever going to make like a custom container for Python. You will want to think about adding some of these methods to your class, partly because it's just going to make the class that much easier to work with. One of the other things that you can do in implementing these methods is you can also start to be a little bit creative. Just to show an example of that, maybe I could go into this getItem method and do a little creative examination of the n argument. For example, I could look at the n and say, well, if you're a string, let's actually use that as a filter. You'll like this. This is a neat example. Let's say if you're a string, what I will do is I'll return H for H in self-holdings if the name is equal to n. And then if it's not a string, maybe I'll return the original lookup there. What I'm doing here is I'm kind of overloading the square brackets to do something more interesting. What I could do, let's go ahead and run this. If I make a portfolio, okay, so portfolio from CSV, like that, I can either index it to get specific items, or what I can do is I can index it by name, and it will give me the specific stacks that match that name. It's like I've given the object some kind of magic. You can do lookups, doing kind of like a filter operation. This is actually a really powerful feature to know about if you're writing Python code where you're trying to make your code kind of match like a particular problem that you're trying to solve. You can actually use Python's magic methods to kind of mold the environment to the problem, as opposed to trying like wedging the problem into some unnatural environment. That's an example of making a custom container. There are a variety of other methods that you could add on there. You need to look at a reference manual, though, to know all the ins and outs of every possible thing that you can do, though.